faithful. A lot's gone on this last week. It didn't really begin, but you might say that the new flashpoint, of which there have been many, was the May 25th death of a black man by the name of George Floyd. And in the last few months, we've seen several incidents that have become very public. We saw the death of a man by the name of Aubrey, and I don't really remember his first name, who was killed by 2 or 3 white men who saw him jogging, claimed to believe that he was a burglar, tracked him down, and ended up shooting him to death. It took almost 7 months before the government responded and arrested those men. Prior to that, there was an incident where a woman was at home. A neighbor called and said that the front door to her home was ajar, and they thought that someone might be burglarizing the house. Police officers arrived, and they went around the building, and instead of going up to the front door, they went around, and one looked in through the window and saw the woman in her living room and assumed that she was the burglar, pointed his gun in the window, shot, and killed her. She was a black woman. And then, as I said, just this past week, George Floyd in Minneapolis. Many of us can still see the images. This was captured on video where once he was handcuffed and placed on the ground, the police officer put his knee on his neck and held him down for 8 or 9 minutes. During that period of time, all of which was captured on video, Mr. Floyd was heard repeatedly saying, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." The police officer refused to yield and let him up. Paramedics arrived. He had gone unconscious. They could not revive him, and he died. Since that time, the outcry for the arrest of the police officers has grown into an incredible crescendo until just a day or two ago, the police officer was finally arrested. And black people all over our country have been asking the question, why did it take so long to arrest a police officer for what seems to be so evidently some kind of force that led to his death, whether we call it murder or manslaughter, whatever it is. It seems fairly clear that what this police officer did led to this man's death. And black people are rightfully angered that these kinds of events continue to unfold. And we as white people, I think, tend to sit back and watch this, and we think, well, this is terrible, this is unfortunate, let justice play out. And yet, when was the last time we heard of a white person being pinned to the ground with an officer's knee on his neck, crying out, "I can't breathe," until he finally dies? We can't. And we have to ask the question, why does this seem to only happen to people of color and not white people? Well, it's a bit comforting in a twisted kind of way for us to be able to look at all of the rioting that has taken place all over the nation in the last 3-4 days. Every night I'm glued to the television watching as the Starbucks is burned, or police cars are caught on fire, or Molotov cocktails are thrown at police officers. And somehow, as white people, I think we tend to look at these things and find justification in those by pointing to the behavior of these people who are taking advantage of the situation, who are obviously acting in a violent way, and say, well, see, that's the kind of people they are. As though that somehow comforts us in saying, well, this man probably got what he deserved. And I feel as though it's time for us as Christians, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever the ethnicity. It is time for us as Christians to stand up and say, this is wrong. There is something wrong in our culture. There is something wrong even among our police forces when we allow these kinds of behaviors to go on and we don't say anything about it. We need to stand up for what is right. I want to read from you a verse in the Old Testament, Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It's actually when I was a new Christian in high school, 30 years ago. We sang this as a song. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? The message throughout the Old Testament of justice is pervasive. And even though we as human beings can never actually come to a place of true justice, after all, how can you give justice for a man whose life has been taken? You cannot give that life back. And true justice would demand that that life be given back. And yet we come as close as we can. We must demand justice. We must, as Christians, stand up and say, this is wrong, and not be satisfied until true justice is given as best as human beings can possibly bring. It's time for us as Christians, and particularly white Christians, and particularly white Christians in rural areas who seem to be so far away from all of that stuff. It becomes easy for us to say, well, that's in Chicago, and that's in LA, and that's in New York, and that's in Minneapolis. That stuff happens in the big city, but not here. We're all good. You know what? We're not all good. We're not all good when human beings are being killed because of their color. It's not okay. And as Christians, we need to stand up and declare that it is not okay. I don't know what the answers are, but I do know that we need to speak the truth. There is no greater truth than the gospel. And what our nation needs more than anything else is the true gospel of Jesus Christ lived out by Christians of every ethnicity and every color. And it is time for the church to stand up with one voice and declare that the gospel alone brings justice. The gospel alone brings hope. It needs to transform human hearts. It alone can transform those hearts. We can pass more laws. We can seek justice. We can mete out where we find injustice. But justice without the gospel is insufficient to transform a culture that learns to love and love peace rather than the hatred we see so evident all around us.